The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, everyone, and welcome to this Friday lunchtime Fast Case Work from Home webinar. So my name is Ken. I am your West Coast reference attorney who is moderating today's session with our very special guest, David Nair. So today we're going to talk about what legal research can learn from journalism with Law Street Media. So if none of you have had the pleasure of interacting with David, he is our editor-in-chief of Law Street Media, which is our in-house legal news publication, because everyone sometimes wants to just read about the law without having to read a 60-page case or complaint in the process. Now, before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping to cover. So as always, a reminder that while I promise you will learn a lot during this session, I am not certified to provide you with CLE credit for this session. But still, I hope you stay for the entirety of the session and learn a bunch. Otherwise, as I mentioned before, our presenter today is going to be our editor-in-chief, David of Law Street Media, who I am going to turn it over to take the floor. So David, when you are ready, share your screen and take it away.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for having me on, Ken. I appreciate the introduction. Ken is one of the newest additions to the Law Street Media team as well. He's been writing some fantastic content for us, so I think he deserves recognition for that too. If you see his name on lawstreetmedia.com, it's one and the same Ken. So today I wanted to talk about how journalism, this kind of field that I've entered, from a legal perspective, can kind of enhance your legal research experience. Not only is legal news useful as an attorney doing research, but also I wanted to share how learning how to do legal journalism has made me a better researcher. And so just to get started, I want to give kind of an overview of what I want to talk about today. So three broad areas. One, how can news aid your research? Why is legal news valuable to lawyers, and what role does it play in the research process? And second, I want to talk about how Law Street Media journalists do their work, conduct their research. Research is a big part of journalism, and I want to talk about the tools we use, some of which will be familiar, but hopefully some new, and how that works, as a process, and maybe how that relates to the normal, quote unquote, legal research process. And then third, I want to talk about how these techniques that I'll be discussing can be applied to general legal research, and kind of get to why I decided to make this presentation. So I want to first talk about my background, and why I feel like this is a valuable journey to share with you. So my first job at Fastcase, and indeed my first job out of law school, was a lot like Ken's. I did these webinars, the training webinars about 2 years ago. If you were learning how to use Fastcase then, you might have heard my voice. As a Fastcase reference attorney, I helped our customers conduct legal research every day. When it comes to either building search queries in Fastcase or just even the basics of what what information that Fastcase presents is valuable given the particular thing you're interested in finding out. I came into Fastcase, like I said, straight out of law school, but I have prior backgrounds in both journalism and just the world of libraries, from various positions in college. It's all these worlds are about finding information. So after a year at Fastcase, I started transferring to our Docket alarm product, which is, I always say it's a recent acquisition. It's no longer a recent acquisition. And so I worked as the Docket alarm product manager for a year, and that role, in a similar way, I was helping people find information using Docket alarm, which is, as you may have seen if you've been attending the series, a great tool for finding information on court dockets. So the journey of everything up until the opinion. You can find the opinions in Fastcase, but you find the way you got there in Docket Alarm. And then after about a year of that, I became the Law Street Media editor-in-chief, kind of synthesizing everything that I've learned so far at Fastcase and really, my entire, all of my jobs, kind of synthesizing into one position. And I learned how to do legal research, properly, obviously in law school, but also when I became a reference attorney. And I love that as the Law Street Media editor-in-chief, I'm still doing legal research. So I thought I'd share what I've learned and how legal research is really, has a lot to learn from the kind of research I'm doing on the journalism side. All right. So I want to first get into why legal news matters. Excuse me. As I'm sure you've all, experienced legal researchers know, secondary sources are very valuable in the world of research. You can't cite them in court necessarily. Well, let me put it this way: they're not binding to a court. You can, the bulk of your argument needs to be supported by case law and statutes, right? But secondary sources are incredibly valuable for providing background knowledge, to helping you find the primary source that you really need. So when you think of secondary sources, you might be thinking, treatises, the big books behind the shelf in every lawyer's office, in the background of their commercials. And that's a big part of it, and Fastcase has a lot of those. But news is an interesting aspect of that too. And it goes without saying that news is probably a lot more digestible than a textbook, but it still provides the same benefits in maybe a smaller scale. So legal news can give you an overview of a particular subject area. For example, Law Street Media, which I'll talk about specifically in a slide or two, goes into depth on technology and agriculture. Those are our two main industry focus areas. And so if you're starting to learn about cannabis regulations in California, you probably are not surprised to hear that that's a big new area of law. Legal news can help you get up to speed on what's happening. What big ticket litigation is ongoing? What are the issues that are currently being resolved in the courts? And you can also use legal news to find out what others are arguing in similar circumstances. So just to give a quick example, Law Street Media covers a lot of intellectual property litigation in the in the technology industry. A lot of what we cover involve what are commonly known as patent trolls or non-practicing entities. Large companies being sued by companies that pretty much only exist to hold intellectual property. And after covering those for a few months, we've started to see cases where the big companies are fighting back. So, in fact, we'll publish a story later today showing how a large tech company was able to secure transfer of a case outside of a patent favorable district. You can use this kind of as a blueprint for learning how other lawyers are, what other lawyers are doing, what strategies are they taking, what's effective, and where are those strategies effective, what courts, what jurisdictions. And then also you can use legal news just generally to follow the big cases in your area. So for example, while a particular cannabis lawyer in Florida might not be involved in the Flora-Grown case, which is a very, potentially consequential marijuana licensing case. If you're interested in or if you practice in the Florida cannabis space, then you definitely want to pay attention to that case. And there's no better way to do that than with legal news. All right, and then I want to talk specifically about Law Street Media and what we do. I think specifically Law Street Media is, kind of our internal slogan is news leads to business. We want to be practical and we want to show opportunities for lawyers. So as I mentioned, our news is industry focused. You might, on other legal news sites, you might see practice areas as the subdivision, and you can find cases by practice area in Law Street Media, but we are organizing our reporters and organizing our website by industry so that an attorney that wants to be an expert in the tech world can easily follow our tech newsletter, or the agriculture world can easily follow our agriculture newsletter. And I always write and I edit with a focus on practicality. So, we always mention what's, who's involved in a case, right? Like the parties and the lawyers, because, that's important information for finding stories. But what I really try to focus on is how is this case useful to lawyers? And I really kind of echo what I talked about on the last slide. I want to make sure there's something useful for a lawyer who maybe isn't involved in this case to read, to get out of a particular story. So what that means is keeping lawyers informed of opportunities. If you look at the case kind of in the screenshot I attached of Law Street Media, Facebook sues domain names for cyber squatting. That was an instance where Facebook sued the actual domain names themselves in rem jurisdiction, as opposed to, whoever mysterious entity held them. This could, if you have a client that is, interested in securing a domain name that is currently being cyber squatted upon, which is a thing that happens, this Facebook story can be really useful to you. You might not represent Facebook, the case might not involve you, but the subject matter sure might, and it sure might be useful. And another thing on the practical side of things that Law Street Media does to really enhance this is we do provide links to the relevant documents and dockets right in the story. Other services do the same, and if not, they should, just to reinforce that this is practical. As I mentioned, legal news can often be a gateway to further research, and we really lean into that with Law Street Media, rather. So, if you want to see how Facebook made these arguments, you can go into the dockets and see exactly what they did, and use that to inform your argument, maybe where you sue, or how you sue, or who you sue in the case of the cyber squatting suit, right? All right, and just I probably should have mentioned this at the top, but Law Street Media is a free site. You can go to www.lawstreetmedia.com. I'm sure some of you are fans already, but go there, sign up for newsletters, browse the site. We publish a whole bunch of content every weekday. And as I mentioned, we cover tech and agriculture, and we are in the process of expanding further. And we're planning on covering everything, right? So we're not a niche publication, or at least our goal is to be as broad as any legal news service you could ever want. Okay, I want to next discuss some of the tools that Law Street Media reporters use to do their work and how we do it. So first I want to talk about Docket Alarm. As I mentioned, we integrate with Docket Alarm. Our users can take advantage of it, but we also use it to power Law Street Media. And this is kind of part of why I mentioned my background a few slides back. It's kind of a shoo-in that that I moved from Docket Alarm to Law Street, and now we use now we use Docket Alarm extensively at Law Street. So I want to make sure I'm talking about docket research, generally speaking, because it is a wide world. There are plenty of services out there. I'll be discussing Docket Alarm here, but it's important to note that you can even find some of this information on just Pacer. Docket Alarm is a much better way of using Pacer, but this information all really applies to dockets generally. Docket research isn't always part of the main legal research process. When I worked at a clinic in law school, I spent most of my time in dockets because the case I was looking at was extremely procedurally complicated. But by and large, most of the time you're looking at case law, and it's very important to look at complaints, look at briefs, just to, as I said before, just to find, arguments that are being made. But I want to talk about Docket Alarm here because this is how we find most of our cases. And I want to share this because it might be useful for you, maybe at a smaller scale, but it might be useful for lawyers to use the same tools to find relevant cases in their area. So the screenshot here is just a snippet of Docket Alarm's search cheat sheet. So if you have a Docket Alarm account, you log in, you click on the search bar, you'll see this cheat sheet as well. And we won't be going over everything that's on here by any means, but there's what I wanted to do is show how powerful Docket Alarm search queries are. If you're familiar with Fastcase, you probably are familiar with much of the kind of the top left quadrant of that image. So, the usual Boolean search terms, but I want to discuss how useful Docket Alarm is for advanced search queries. So if you can see at the bottom left, you can search for particular parties. If you type into Docket Alarm party : and then, in the parentheses, you can state a given party name. What that does is it searches the party field of a given, of all of our dockets. So it looks through the entire Docket Alarm database, but not the text of the docket sheets, but only the parties that are listed on the docket. It's a lot more narrow. So this is extremely useful, because if you search just Apple in Docket Alarm, you're going to get a whole lot of cases that involve fruit. You're going to get a lot involving the tech company, to be sure. But they won't necessarily be party to every case either. So I don't want to give away too much of what Law Street Media does, but a lot of the cases we find using this party filter. So I have, a whole bunch of companies I want to track. And so I create a very elaborate search string using this party filter to find cases involving those particular parties. And then I also, once you run a search, you can set an alert on it. And what that search does is automate that search. You can set it up to every hour, and it will email you whenever there's anything new. So, I know that saying that just sounds so simple, but it's something that can make a lot of work a lot easier. I've talked to lawyers, even quite recently, who just, are manually updating databases of cases they want to track just by checking every few days. And Docket Alarm is designed to make that really easy with these automated alerting tools. And as I mentioned on the slide, you can also do the same searches by judges or by law firms. So to give an example of how you might want to take advantage of this, like let's say I'm using cannabis as an example because we're writing about it a lot lately, but it can work for any field. If you know the competitive landscape in your area, you can search for a particular set of companies. If you are in a very specialized practice area, if your firm specializes in a specific kind of litigation, you can use a similar search, not for party but for firm, to track those firms to see what kind of cases they have. And if if you've got a big case before a certain judge, you can look up their previous decisions as well. At Law Street, we mostly are looking at parties and law firms to find cases of interest. But there's a whole lot more that you can do with Docket Alarm searches that goes beyond what we're doing here, what you can see on screen. Other things we do with Docket Alarm is search for things like, very specialized practice areas. Like, for example, privacy, or even cannabis specifically. I know I'm talking about cannabis a lot. In the tech industry, we want to talk about cryptocurrency. We want to talk about privacy. But you can find, you can run a search for those on Fastcase. But if a lot of times with very emerging issues of litigation, there's not any published opinions yet. So we use Docket Alarm to kind of capture things before they get big. so to speak, so that we're making sure we're capturing everything that's relevant, even before judges have started making rulings. So the other thing I want to talk about, and this is, it's again, it's another example of something that's basic in Docket Alarm if you read it out loud, but it's extremely useful. We at Law Street need to track cases for stories, and litigators need to do the same to stay up to date on cases that they're maybe not involved in, but that they want to follow. So every docket in Docket Alarm can be tracked. This automates the process of checking to see if there's anything new, much like we can with the searches. You can track dockets as well. So we use this to, let's say we find, using the search alerts that we kind of talked about here, we write a story about an interesting new complaint. For example, we wrote a story last week about the Internet Archive, which was sued for copyright violation by a kind of a coalition of major publishers. And we wrote that story about the complaint, and then, but we want to know what happens when the defendant files their answer. We want to know what happens when briefing starts. Dispositive motions like dismissals and summary judgments, as I'm sure you all know, that's where a lot of very interesting things happen. So we use these, we use docket tracking to make it easy to know when to follow up. So we're monitoring probably hundreds of different cases waiting for follow-ups, and we can't check manually. We use Docket Alarm to automate that process. All right, and so specifically, I kind of went over this already, but just to summarize how Law Street Media uses dockets, we've got alerts on search queries for companies of interest and law firms. We are doing similar queries for certain subject areas. I want to also mention you can use Docket Alarm to find certain PACER nature of suit codes. We use antitrust in particular and product liability because those are currently really big areas in some of the fields that we're covering. So for example, Monsanto is probably over a dozen per day product liability lawsuits filed against it. And I know that because I've set up an alert on the PACER nature of suit code for product liability. I want to talk about that briefly, actually. The PACER nature of suit code system is a little bit, it's both too restrictive and not restrictive enough. So anybody, you can input whatever nature of suit code you want when you file a case, but you also can, the nature of suit code is relatively limited. So I have to do manual searching for things like cryptocurrency or for privacy, because none of these things really fit into a nature of suit code that's on the list. So we have a kind of a combination of case types and nature of suit code searches and text searches trying to find cases that mention words that are important for our industries like cannabis, cryptocurrency, blockchain, privacy, and the like. And then, as I mentioned, we also use case tracking to look for follow-ups, and it should make processes a lot easier. All right, so I want to talk about our second tool that I wanted to discuss today, which is RSS feeds. You might have heard of these. You might see this kind of I don't know how to describe it. Let's call it the orange icon that I have on screen. It vaguely resembles the Wi-Fi icon. It would have been useful if I knew what RSS stood for, but I don't. But what these feeds are is it's something that websites provide that allow you to, it kind of converts new content on that website into a format that can be read by an RSS feed reader, which is a website or an app. The one I use is called Feedly. It's just the first one that came up, so I don't have much information as to the competitive landscape of RSS feed readers. But so what these feeds do is basically it's kind of like Docket alarm alerts, except for anywhere on the internet. So um, as you can see on the screen, I've gathered RSS feeds following various legal news sites that are of interest to me, um, and I've subscribed to all those RSS feeds on Feedly. Each RSS feed reader is different, so I can't necessarily give a tutorial as to how to add it, but it should be pretty straightforward. And what this is useful for is that basically gives you a news dashboard. So you can collect RSS feeds across a bunch of different news sites, subscribe to them all, and that way you're not checking 50 different news sites to get all the latest information, but you can easily get a feed of everything that's coming as it comes from all of these sites, all in one place. As you can see, if you can read the numbers on the screenshot I took, I haven't read a lot of these feeds lately, but you can see we've got there's tons of articles coming in across all these different news services, and so we can really see what's going on at a glance, as opposed to having to check dozens of sites. So I want to get into how we use this, and this is how you can use it too. There's tons of content out there that deserves coverage in a legal news publication that isn't litigation. There's a bunch of examples of this. So I often talk about industry news in my, on Law Street Media in our stories. That can include things like a big acquisition, which will likely lead to litigation, or some of the other things that I'll talk about in just a moment on this list. We also can talk about self-regulation, for example. We haven't written about it yet, but there's recently Amazon and Microsoft and IBM, I believe, have announced that they will not be employing facial recognition technology, at least for the foreseeable future, as a result of the current protests. So, there's no lawsuit there. There could be in the future, I don't know, but it's still legally useful to our readers, because if somebody's a privacy advocate, they sure want to know exactly what these companies are up to, even if they're not getting sued. Second aspect that I love to cover with RSS feeds is agency press releases. So you can imagine many practice areas, many subject areas involve intense agency regulation. In the tech industry, we look at the FCC and the FTC a lot. Agriculture industry, we look at the EPA, we look at the USDA. So, this works for pretty much any practice area that's out there that has regulation. If you're an employment lawyer, you want to know what OSHA's up to. You want to know what your state EEOC is up to, and the federal one, of course. And in my experience, at least, I haven't had any trouble finding RSS feeds for any of these agencies. Actually, I wanted to provide a quick tip for finding RSS feeds. Again, always look out for this orange icon with the kind of radial circles. Sometimes you might have to scroll to the bottom of a web page. They might have a link for RSS feeds. It's interesting. It's kind of old school technology. I want to describe it as early internet, which means like 2005 to me. And so they've been around for a while, and so they're kind of subtle. You might see them also. You might see this icon alongside share icons like the Facebook icon and the Twitter icon. And if you click on those, it should allow you to easily add it to your RSS feed reader. So in addition to agency information and industry news, you can talk about Congress, state and federal, of course. A lot of legislation has direct impacts on law, especially in the agriculture world. I'm finding not only for cannabis, but just for agriculture policy generally. And then, as I kind of alluded to before, mergers and acquisitions are really important. I try to follow, press activity from, from some of the big companies in the industries we cover. And again, to reiterate, the real value here is how easy it is to access all of these, sources of information all in one place. And I should note that Law Street Media does have RSS feeds available as well. So you can subscribe to us so that you can easily find all of our stories on your RSS feed reader. I want to quickly mention some specifics on the industry-focused news. This can range from, depending on your practice area. If you want to follow mainstream news like CNN or BBC or whatever, feel free to. But I look at industry-focused publications, which doesn't all, I can't remember the names of them for the agricultural world, but there's, I'm part of covering legal news, and part of legal representation is knowing the area that you're working in. So I've learned a lot about the agriculture world just by reading industry news, and on the tech world, I kind of had a grasp on it already because I'm a nerd. But sites like The Verge or Ars Technica, I follow to really just see, even if it's not something for me to write about, it's to see what's happening in this world. And I think lawyers can benefit from that as well, at the very least, just to see opportunities. All right, so the last thing I want to discuss today is applications. And then, of course, I'd be happy to answer questions in just a few minutes. So just to kind of recap, dockets and news are not legally binding. You can't cite them in court to make a point, although I do, in the hundreds of complaints I see, I do occasionally see somebody citing a news story as evidence, so that's something else to think about. But legal news can efficiently establish background information a lot faster than reading a big treatise, although treatises are still valuable and likely much more scholarly. It's a lot quicker to read a news story. It can lead you to other sources. We do that directly in Law Street Media, but even so, it can just get your brain thinking about what you need to look for. And that, that's something that has been key for me when I was learning how to do legal research. It's, okay, you have your research question, but that might not quite exactly match what you need to search for. And then also, as I said, Law Street's motto is news leads to business. I love thinking about how legal news can inform you of business opportunities. And I think it's important to think of legal research as it's absolutely mostly an activity for crafting your legal arguments that you'll be using in court. But also it can help you learn how to grow your business. So, if you, I try to write very specifically to show opportunities and maybe to show how you can enter a new practice area. I think that's what a lot of our coverage about the cannabis world is covering, kind of new frontiers. And even the tech space, we're looking at new kinds of lawsuits that are coming, and especially for the plaintiffs' lawyers that are on the call, they might be really interested. So for example, Law Street's covered a lot of stories involving news sites. I promise we're not guilty of this. News sites publishing a photographer's photo without a license. And then, these photographers are suing, and it's happening a lot, especially in the last few months. And then now we're starting to see what's the outcome of fair use arguments. How does the fact that a photo is embedded as part of an Instagram post, as opposed to just a copying of the photo, how does that change the outcome? So this, this can help you break new ground and find new clientele, or really find new legal needs that are out there that need to be served. So, the tools that we're using can help you too, in that RSS feeds can consolidate all your news in one place. It can consolidate agency updates. If there's any telecom lawyers on the line, I know the FCC has tons of these feeds to track, all kinds of very specific practice areas. I know the EPA does the same thing. Actually, I might be thinking of USDA, but I think EPA does the same thing as well. They have a lot of feeds that you can follow. So it's a combination of agencies and news sites. And then we also, as I said, use Dockets, use Docket Alarm to get case updates delivered to your inbox, so you don't have to spend hours or a full employee's time just following the cases that you want to track that are interesting to you. And one last thing, you might not have been thinking that you can easily follow these cases, follow cases that you're not directly involved in, but with automation, you can make it a lot easier. And just to quickly wrap up, all these things that I've gone over are things that I've learned that have added additional layers to what I knew about legal research from law school and from my time as a reference attorney. What other sources are out there, how you can easily find them, how you can integrate them into your research process, and how they can make you, or they can help you make better arguments. So I hope this has been a bit useful, and I know we've got plenty of time left over for questions, so I think, Ken, if there's anything else, feel free to jump in.
Yes, I want to thank everyone. This is one of those lovely webinars where everyone has stayed with us through the entirety of the presentation, so thank you for your dedication. And I see a lot of repeat attendees on the line, so I want to thank everyone, as always, for coming to these extra, and I consider to be super fun webinars. We do have a couple of questions. David, if you have the time to answer them for us.
I do.
So the first question is, you mentioned that Law Street Media was never going to be a niche publication. So one of our attendees wants to know, where is Docket Alarm heading in the next year or two?
That's a great question. So I have to say first that I was the Docket Alarm product manager. I'm not doing that anymore, but I'm still plugged in. So Docket Alarm is going to continue adding more and more state court coverage. Ken, just to clarify, is the question asking about Docket Alarm or Law Street Media?
It was Law Street Media, so thank you for catching my my misspeak there.
No.
We had a second question about Docket Alarm, but we'll get to that in a moment.
Right on. So Law Street Media we are adding more and more sections. We are currently building out in no particular order. We're looking at healthcare and the finance industries to launch sometime later this year. I don't want to be too specific because I'm not sure exactly when we're going to be flipping the switch on those, but those are our next big industry areas. We are aiming to launch, I think we have a total of 9 planned, 9 industry areas, which are aiming to cover pretty much everything under the sun. And then we'll see where we go from there. We also added, if you go into Law Street Media now, if you haven't gone, already, you'll see a Docket Alarm sidebar that links like relevant, it finds the parties and the law firms that are there and automatically links to searches in Docket Alarm for those parties. We just added that about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. So maybe not just added. Anyway, so we're adding similar integrations as well. So you're going to be seeing more and more similar enhancements to stories as well, and that'll take place across the entire site.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So our second question is asking about the attachments in your stories from Law Street Media. So the question is, number one, you may have already touched on this. Number one, does a person have to pay to read stories from Law Street Media? And number two, are the built-in hyperlinked attachments free of charge to access? That's
correct. I'm sorry, that's a great question. Yes, they're both free. Law Street Media is free. And then the links to the documents that you find in the stories are free as well. If you start, once you click on a link, you'll be taken to Docket Alarm, and you won't be charged, of course. But if you start browsing around, you might eventually, be prompted to create an account. But we do make a point of ensuring that those documents that are in the stories are free. That's something that's been key to us since before we launched the site. So that's kind of something I feel very passionately about as a consumer of legal news.
Perfect. We also we have another person who's asking about Help on Docket Alarm. So that is a side question. If you need assistance on Docket Alarm, you're more welcome. You're always welcome 8 a.m. until 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Call into the support line, hit option 4, or you can email support@docketalarm.com. That is where I come in, and I'm more than happy to help you with walking you through Docket Alarm or designing queries, research. It is full circle here at the Docket Alarm reference attorney team.
Yeah.
Well, that is all we have for the moment as far as questions are concerned. If anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to send those over. support@fastcase.com. Which one that is support@fastcase.com if we did not get to them or if we missed them in the questions box. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for attending. Our next webinar will be Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Look for that email in your inbox on Monday or Tuesday with the registration link. Otherwise, David, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Everyone on the line, enjoy your weekends as well. And thank you all for sticking with us and attending with full force. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for the time, everybody.